Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is the 10th annual virtual residency workshop. It's Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. This is Research Data Management. Our moderator is Ann James. Ann, take it away.
All right, thank you. So welcome to our panel today and welcome back to our session. We do have a great selection here of panelists coming from a variety of different sized institutions to speak with us today about research data management. It's a nice mix of colleagues who are representing folks from both the CI and advanced research computing side, as well as academic libraries. And I myself am moderating the panel here today. I sit as a data services librarian and as a geographer coming out of George Washington University in Washington, D.C. So we can start with a few brief introductions. So I'd invite my colleagues to tell us a little bit about yourself, your title, your institution, and your role, as
Yes,
well as a
sorry.
bit about your current position and trajectory, if you have a moment. Whoops.
Sure. I'll start. My name is Jason Sims, and I am the research computing manager at Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. We are a small, highly selective liberal arts college, and we have about 1,700 students, so we are quite small. I am the first person in my role. I have been in this role for about 18-ish months. I came to this role from a very similar role at Lafayette College, where um, I was part of the team that spun up the first kind of research computing ecosystem that they offered there. So I've done this, you know, um, for a while. I've been in this world for about 6 or 7 years, and I decided to pursue it because I find research computing to be uh, kind of more variable and more interesting on a day-to-day level than the sort of more straight academic technology role that I came from, which I dearly loved. But I find this to be a different kind of challenge and to have more of the ebb and flow that I kind of like. So yeah, that's me.
I can go. So my name is Sarah Marquise. I am the research data manager at Harvard University in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which is the largest school at Harvard. There are about ten schools at Harvard. And I'm within the research computing department who manages a majority of the compute and storage for the university. I came to this field originally as an archivist. So I'm an archivist and records manager, at least from my educational background. But I have now been doing research data management for over 7 years. Previously, I was at the medical school, so Harvard Medical School, and I transitioned over to the university about a year this year. Um, and so I currently collaborate with labs, researchers, staff to manage their research data, primarily again with research computing in mind. But it's throughout the data lifecycle. So as researchers are generating data, working on data analysis, and then I promote data sharing and reuse as well. And then in terms of the university, this is also the first role for Faculty of Arts and Sciences. So I am starting a new group there, but we've had research data management at the medical school for almost 8 years. So they were one of the first schools that I know of that kind of had a research data manager in the role, and I'm now kind of bringing that over to the larger university.
Hi, I'm Pete Schlax. I'm the science and data librarian for Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, another small liberal arts college, highly selective, about 2,000 students also. I started my career as a research scientist. I got a PhD in biophysics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Went on to a postdoc at Johns Hopkins, and then worked as a research scientist for about 7 years. And from there, I moved on to Bowdoin College, and I ran their cell biology and genetics labs for about 7 years. And then I was looking for something pretty different. And the position for an instructional research librarian with a data management component became available at Bates College. And I thought that it combined a couple things that were really important to me as I was sort of moving through a career. I really liked helping people learn about the science that I'd spent a long time learning about. And as an instructional research librarian, I get to do that, get to work with people doing some really cool projects, students and faculty. And then the data management part was something that was new. So I was replacing someone who'd been the science librarian for about 35 or 40 years. And they knew that they wanted someone who understood data. And so they were willing to take a chance to pull someone into the library role who really was more trained as a scientist and then would develop the skills needed to be a research librarian. And so I've been in this position, I think, for about 12 years now. And it's evolved, and what data management at Bates College has really evolved. But a lot of what I started doing was sort of talking to people about how they manage their data and what resources they used, and then really sort of intentionally built a lot of relationships with people on the IT side and also on the grant side to try to help liaise all of those groups and the researchers so that we could sort of get all the resources that were necessary together. And then they could have a point of contact. The researchers would have a point of contact who could help sort of move them along. And over those 12 years, we've developed, I think, a pretty robust program. And I'm part of the team that actually helps develop all of the research data management plans. So I see all of them and can help people sort of find the resources that they need.
I'm Tobin Magley. I'm the lead data management specialist at Northwestern University. I sit within Central IT in the Research Computing and Data Services group. So we've got research computing, data science, data management all on one roof under IT. I've been working in the research support field for about 10 years now, but I've worked at several different institutions. My first entry was in through libraries at a medical library. So got my feet wet with doing user support there, transitioned to another library with more research data management specific stuff, and now I work in IT. And I basically went through this path because I like helping people with the stuff that was hard for me when I was doing my PhD. There wasn't really any support for research data management or any sort of data science where I was. So it's really gratifying just to be able to demystify some of this stuff for people who really need it. And having worked both in libraries and IT, I'm seeing the different approaches and different sides to things. Libraries are very relationship focused. IT seems to be service focused. So I'm trying to take the best parts out of both environments to inform how I do my work.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Freeman. I have been the Director for Research Technology Operations at Harvard Business School. End of May, I've retired, so I'm looking back on my career there. It's nice working with, first, thanks for allowing me to be here, and nice working with all the folks on this panel. Like many of the other panelists, I was a former researcher, so trained as a research biologist, then sort of hopped in and out of the sort of support role over the past 20 to 30 years. Sort of fumbling, like, do I really want to do research? Do I really want to, live off of soft money? Well, I think I need something a little more stable and solid. But all the time, I think what has really kept me close was just having fun with researchers and research and sort of discovery of new info. I started at Harvard Business School about 8 years ago. Prior to that, I was also at Faculty of Arts and Sciences Research Computing. I was originally part of the ACIRF project, so got early in on the facilitation opportunities. What was particularly interesting for me at Harvard Business School was sort of continuing the facilitation opportunity for those who were farther removed from sort of the big iron, so social science, business research, behavioral research. It's a very different mindset in how individuals work, and also with the scale of data that people work with. So it's very interesting and very challenging in that regard. HBS has about 180 faculty. There's no undergraduates. We have nothing to do with the MBAs or the exec eds. So we're working primarily with the research faculty, and they hire RAs, and there are a small number of doctoral students. So the research teams end up being about 2 or 3, maybe 4 people. So it's much smaller potatoes, which means that the problems might be a little bit larger because there's fewer people to work on them. But one of the things that has been exciting is I sort of fell into up this pseudo RDM role. About 6 to 7 years ago, we realized that we needed to do something around making researchers aware of research data management. And so I partnered with individual from Baker Library, and she and I actually put together a course, which I can talk about later on. But it was exciting because it was an opportunity for me to learn, but also the two of us together and partnering, we could really try to help researchers as best as possible make use of resources and and really hopefully have fewer problems along the research data lifecycle.
All right, and I think Daniel,
I'm
last
the
but
last
not
one.
least, I think
Yeah.
so.
All right. Okay. So, hi, good afternoon. So, Henry and Anne. So, thank you for, inviting me and allowing me to tell my story here, fellow panelists. So, my name is Daniel Vrencianu. I'm a professor of physics at a place called Texas Southern University in Houston, which is a medium-size HBCU, about 10,000 students. My field in physics, it's atomic and molecular physics. So I'm doing that using theory and equations, and sometimes I need to use computational tools, modeling and simulations, and that's how I got involved into computing, because the time when I arrived was nothing there. So I start building, and we got resources gradually more and more. So I ended up being the director of high performance computing center, mostly for my own research interest, and me and a group of researchers in our college. So it's an organic organization, is not formalized, or so we do it because we love computing, we love research, and it's we have to do with the resources that we have there. So I'm on the side of of researchers, not as much in the side of big organization, doing support or archival or anything like that. So I'm representing that side of things. So yeah, that's about me. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions here this afternoon. We may not get through all of them today, but I'd ask researchers, or excuse me, my colleagues to chime in as they have contributions here. The first set is talking about the key components of data management. So what do you consider to be the most important elements of the research data management process or concept, and what experiences and observations have led you to this list?
This is Pete. I'll hop in, and others can basically probably provide better answers, but I'll start. So I think in terms of most important elements, I'm not sure. That's a hard question for me always. What's your favorite song? Most important, I don't know, but I think some things that are very important, I found are really thinking about this data management before you start to generate data, if possible, and sort of making a prospective data inventory. So, what kinds of data will you generate? How much will you generate? And then really being intentional when you think about where and when and how long the data are going to be stored. A lot of times that's really difficult to get out of people that I'm working with. They don't really want to think that. We'll think about that. We'll get there when we get there. But really, doing all those things first allows you to really be explicit about the responsibilities of all the people that are involved in helping you caretake those data. So it's usually not just you, it's usually a group of people who deal with resources, and being really explicit about those responsibilities just makes it a lot easier as you go along. And then I think you'll hear this a lot today, but it's not just the data. It's what we call the metadata or the narrative or the contextualization of the data. Storing reams of comma separated value files really is not that helpful. You need to contextualize those data. And so thinking about what the metadata are before you start generating them, and sort of having everyone be responsible for generating it with the data, just makes dealing with the data so much easier. So those are some of the things I think are really important. And then sort of the observations that led to that. I'll just give a simple, quick one, and others can chime in with different ones. But the bottom line is people leave. So we work with students. A lot of the research that happens here at Bates is research that's done with students, and students leave. When they, get that med school acceptance letter, their minds go in a completely different direction, and things that were incredibly valuable and important to them a week before they got that just aren't, and then they leave. Faculty and staff leave, and sometimes people leave projects. And so thinking about how you're going to deal with all of those things before it happens just makes it easier, because when people leave, it just gets really frantic, and it may not be something that you think about in time, and then those data are lost. So those are some answers that I thought of.
Those are great answers, Peter. I would echo basically everything that you said. My example for the metadata thing was I had an NIH informationist supplement to work with a research group to actually share their data in the NCBI databases. It took weeks and weeks and weeks to track down all the metadata that we needed to submit to this database because it wasn't recorded along with the data, and we were having to dig through lab notebooks or dig through people's memories to try to dig it up. So if you know what you need to collect ahead of time and keep it all in one place, it's a heck of a lot easier. And just to add to your point about people leaving, one of the things that I've been dealing with a lot on the IT side of things with data storage is people storing data in places that aren't accessible to the rest of the research group after they leave. Like in our environment, we use OneDrive and SharePoint to store research data. So if the student has it in OneDrive, which looks a heck of a lot like SharePoint in certain circumstances, that will get deleted when their university ID gets deleted. So they don't really understand the difference that if they store it in SharePoint, it actually will stay with the lab. So having to explain this to people repeatedly is a big part of my job. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, that I think the data management is especially important at the beginning of a project and also at the end of a project. So those seem to be the stages of the life cycle in which we've been the most successful in trying to instill data management concepts of, when you're starting a project or you're entering a new lab, this is the time when you should be planning your data. You should be thinking about, like you said, where you're going to store it, how you're going to organize it, who's going to be accessing that data. And then as you're nearing the end of your project or you're getting ready to leave your lab or the university, that's a prime time to be thinking about, again, what am I going to do with this data? Am I going to share it? If so, is it going to be in a data repository, or do we have a lab website that we're going to be sharing it from? So I found that those segments of the data life cycle have been key, to prevent things like you were saying, Tobin, of having data get orphaned or lost, or maybe other lab members don't know how to access it. So really keeping those important elements in mind for those parts of the data life cycle. And then I was also thinking about data storage specifically, making sure that you're thinking about data storage throughout the project, but it seems like, again, people only care about it at the end. So yeah, just kind of echoing what both Tobin and Peter were saying.
I'm gonna jump on that bandwagon too. I wrote down a bunch of little bullet points, but the first one in big letters was planning, and I'm just picking out certain places along the life cycle. I just can't tell you how many times I've seen researchers, especially research associates, sort of tripping over themselves because of the fact that they're just going to wing it. And in the day when data was small potatoes, probably not such is doable, but not really the case anymore. And so it really does require a significant amount of planning, and not just for how am I going to get the data, but all throughout the life cycle. And I want to also add to that, is the data acquisition, data transfer. I see more problems and more difficulties because people don't know what they're getting. They don't know what the format. They don't know how to transfer it. They don't know, and there's just so many pieces there that, had they spent the time trying to understand what data they're collecting or they're acquiring, and then also what analysis pattern they're going to use, that would dictate whether or not their data is in the right format and whether or not it has to be transformed or stored in a different format in order for them to be able to use it. So to me, those two pieces are probably incredibly important.
I will add that, one thing to echo everybody, we just recently designed a data intake form to sort of force researchers and people coming into the institution to answer some of those questions and to sort of form the basis of subsequent conversations with them, to ask about their data. And it's asking exactly these kinds of questions. One that I would add that we find especially important is, what do you predict your data growth to be year over year? Because it's one thing to pull in an initial large amount of data or to start with a small amount of data, but then if you're going to be generating lots of data, and we ask about performance requirements, do you need these to be accessible quickly? Can we just put them in a freezer somewhere, whatever? So all of those things, again, echoed, but I think something that is interesting, at least at our institution, which may not be as much of an issue at a larger institution, is I think our institution, Swarthmore, has a very good handle on institutional data. So there are, teams of folks in the provost's office and other things who speak a lot about institutional data. And that seems to be a much more mature and robust, set of workflows than research data. Research data is often something that has not been as formally considered or thought about, and it is starting to be now as requirements are necessitating it, and as researchers are asking more and more questions about it and needing different ways to access, store it, whatever, share it. But it's an important question to understand where research data management lives within your institution. Is it a institutional kind of thing where the institution's going to craft policies and workflows related to this? Is it an ITS thing? Is it a departmental thing? Is it a, shared team of research computing folks, from the various departments as well as central ITS maybe? So those are questions that we're working with right now, but I think that that's important to get a handle on is who actually is in a position and a decision-making capacity for research data specifically versus institutional data.
If I could hop in, this is Pete Schlax again. I think that idea of figuring out where the responsibility lies and who the decision makers are, I would just echo that 100%. We, as a group, so at Bates, we have a merged organization with the library and information services. So we do have, I think, a pretty good communication across those two divisions, and then I think we've built up some good relations with the grants office, but it really took some time and conversation to figure out how we were going to decide, where these policies, if there was going to even be a policy, were going to come from. And it took us about 18 months to draft and then revise a data research data management policy that we just released, I think maybe a month ago. And where it was going to live was a huge question, and who had the authority to basically say how things were going to behave, and how people would be expected to behave. And I think maybe at a larger institution, it might have even been harder than it was for us. I think for us, people are, we know each other sort of on a first name basis, and I think everyone kind of has the end game in mind. What would be the idea of having this and why, and I think, you know, there's just less sort of territorialism. But even at that, it took a long time. And so I think it's Jason, you brought up a great point. Like, where does it live? And if you're going to have a policy, as soon as you say policy, people start to bristle. So what would it be, and how big would it be, and things like that. And just getting a group of people together that you can sort of trust and all sort of understand the final purpose of it, I think is pretty key.
Peter, I want to just jump in here because that's a really good point. I think one thing that I've taken for granted at Harvard, there was some work over a number of years, but there's a good set of the policies. But what's more helpful for the researchers is here are the resources that are available for data storage, and here, these resources are compliant with these sets of policies, these with those sets of policies, et cetera. And so it's not always just a sort of a shot in the dark for researchers. There's a lot of documentation there. So by at least getting that, again, part of the planning, if they're doing the reading, if they're really looking into this and thinking about this carefully, there's a lot of very easy decisions or very easy paths that they can follow in order to do this well.
And I think just to put a bow on my contribution to this question, one thing that I think is important to understand, that I've come to understand personally, is that pretty much every data management scenario is bespoke. There is no one size fits all, because every researcher, every lab group, whatever it is, every student has a different combination of, size and backup needs and sharing needs and longevity of the data and performance demands on the data and are some of them PII, are some of them HIPAA, are they not? Like, where do they need to be stored? Are they in a secure enclave? Can they be open to the world? Whatever. And when you look at all those variables and you start to do the math, you have exponential numbers of combinations of kind of things to account for. And so one of the things that we're learning is it's fine to kind of have generic sort of buckets into which we can try to place people generally, but what we often find is that almost every solution is a one-off, it's all bespoke, and you kind of have to go into it like that.
I think even to go further than what Jason was saying, I think it's sometimes even more than that, more than just having to build like individual scenarios for each lab, but also weighing the benefits for the researcher and then weighing the benefits for IT or for research computing. And oftentimes they're not the same thing. So you might have IT coming and saying, we need more storage, or we can't offer more storage because we don't want to pay for it. And then researchers saying, we're generating these large data sets, we need more storage and we want it for free. And these are not always going to be overlapping. And you're oftentimes going to have people pushing on both sides to make everyone happy. So yeah, it's every researcher, every lab has their own demands and their own wants and needs. And then you also have internally, what does the university want? What does IT want? And you sometimes have to compromise between the two. And I think we have a question later on in the slide deck that talks about that more. But I just wanted to mention that as well.
Sure. And before we move on to the next question, I don't think we've heard yet from Daniel. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's more than the researcher and the institution, because the funding agencies like NSF and NIH, they require a plan, a data management plan. So they are invested, and from what I've seen, many times people, they take it as a cookie cutter exercise. People don't pay much attention, but it's extremely important. And the success, I have seen that, the success of a grant proposal, many times, depends on how solid is this plan, the data management plan. So it's extremely important to have this plan, and how to build the resources, how to conceive it.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to our next set of questions here, and some of these might have already been covered. But why is research data management important? I think we've touched on that a little bit so far. What are the reasons that CI facilitators, librarians, and related staff should encourage researchers to put effort into it, if there's additional thoughts on that? And then how can individuals in these roles convince researchers to put effort into their research data management? I know that this is a huge challenge that I've experienced at my institution, as well as colleagues that I've talked to within, say, especially within the last few years. So what has worked well for you all?
I think when I started in this field, I was very optimistic, and I would talk a lot about like open science and open data and good for the scientific community. But I think what ends up being more effective is appealing to researchers' self-interest, because having good practices throughout the whole project, like I said in the answer to the first question, saves a lot of time in the long run. And also just pointing out the fact that funding agencies are only getting more strict and strict with enforcement of these policies. It started out with just having to write a data management plan with your funding application. Nobody ever really followed up on if you followed the plan or not. But now, especially with NIH's new setup, they're actually, the data management plan and updating it is actually be part of annual reporting. And I suspect that it'll be harder and harder to receive new funding from these agencies if you aren't complying with the plans that you wrote.
Kind of going off of what Tobin was saying, I think now that data is receiving more recognition, So it used to be just your published works were worthwhile and got you credit, and they were the most important part of your research is, producing this publication. I think now that researchers are starting to actually receive credit for their research data, and that data is getting linked to those publications, and you're sharing data in a data repository. I think that there's a little bit more incentive for researchers to organize and, have documentation associated with those data sets, because they are going to receive, a DOI and some sort of academic credit. So I think that's something good to remind researchers of. Also, sometimes not necessarily the promotion of data management concepts, but almost the opposite of kind of what Tobin was saying with like, if you don't do this, bad things will happen. So the carrot and the stick. So sometimes the carrot doesn't work, the stick will. So oftentimes we will actually restrict data storage unless they review and maintain their existing data storage. It's kind of an incentive to say, if you do some data cleanup, we'll give you more data storage. So, sometimes it's a little bit of both, reminding them of all the good things that data management can do, but also reminding them of all the bad things that will happen, the data horror stories, if you will, if they don't do it correctly.
I think in terms of convincing researchers to put effort into it, I think honestly, most researchers, especially as projects have become, significantly more data intensive and more collaborative, I think they know that it's the right thing to do generally, but maybe they don't know how to do it or what resources are available. And so I think the way that we've tried to deal with it is kind of thinking about it in terms of the long game and try to give them the best experience they can have when they work with us. And then through word of mouth, and then just through proof of concept. I think when they come to us for the next grant, it's just a much easier thing. And one thing I wanted to lean into a little bit was the idea of sort of buckets of resources. I know that it generally is true that you'll need to craft those a little bit for each person, but I think another thing that makes it easier and sort of gets people to buy in is that we do sort of have kind of branded or named resources with descriptions of where they would be useful in the life cycle. And I think having something that's sort of user friendly like that, where people feel like they can sort of pick and choose and then have an example and say, well, that doesn't really work for me, but I'm looking for something like that or like that, but not. And trying to do those kinds of things. I think rather than have a campaign or a flyer or something that convinces them that what we're doing is amazing, I think it's more just playing the long game and trying to have the best experience for them. And I think that has worked pretty well for us.
Great. Additional thoughts? I think there's a couple of folks we haven't heard from yet.
Well, even the question of what constitutes research data, it's still open. So it's the notebooks, the lab notebooks, the meeting minutes, is the data that needs to be, saved and archived, or the PowerPoint presentations. There are lots of things that needs to be categorized if they constitute data, research data, and they need to be stored.
Yeah, I'll also add, and that's a really good point, Daniel, especially since the landscape of research and science is changing and evolving. But we have all these different types of information that we're collecting and managing, if it can be, so something like Twitter,
Yeah.
or X, sorry. one of the things that as we've talked about, is carrots and sticks. I think that's very, very true. I think one of the things that is interesting is for me working at a business school, and probably the same to some degree in the social sciences, is that there's less of a burden on true data management plans. If you're not funded by NSF or NIH, you're not required to do a data management plan. And so there is actually no incentive to actually do planning unless the institution is actually has a policy and a process for handling this. And so what is nice, what I've seen at Harvard, they have now a system in place for handling, in addition to IRB, but also data usage agreements, as well as a data safety plan, which incentivizes the process of research data management. I wish they'd actually do something a little further upstream when it's like, oh, I've got this project in mind. So, go to a tool, start to fill some of this out, and everything sort of flows downstream. But I think with aside from probably most likely the faculty member is handling most of the data management plan or a lot of the logistics around that, I think we've taken an opportunity to sort of simplify this for the researchers themselves and do a checklist. And so by really, if you will, sort of lessening the burden or the administrative overhead, there's more of an incentive for researchers to actually, practice good research data management. One can always preach to the researchers on, this will really help you. I think, horror stories, definitely getting, outgoing, persons to tell their current colleagues, no, this is a nightmare. You don't want to do this after the fact. I think is also really helpful, word of mouth. And as we like to say in the training, you will thank your future self will thank you for having done all this work up front. But I think really just getting the researchers to talk amongst themselves, especially the ones that have been around longer, I think is a good way to energize people to put the effort into it.
Oh, great. All great responses. Are there any additional remarks? Excellent. Thanks so much. All right. So sort of riffing off of that, and we just talked a little bit about this in the last panel leading up to this one. What are some of the best techniques for helping researchers to learn effective approaches to research data management? And what about ways in which you or your colleagues facilitate or teach recommended data management practices?
Okay. I, I dead air is. I'm going to click in every time. I'm sorry. So I would say if we have a technique, and I'm not sure this is really accurate, but we sort of use a flipped classroom technique, I would say. So really, it's not a checklist, but what we do have is a worksheet that we have folks fill out. So we have, I think it's 4 sort of general questions that we ask people to fill out about their data, and the questions have some sub questions in them, but it's typically the sort of thing that you would expect. So what kinds of data will you generate? What kinds of metadata will you generate? How much will you generate? Over what period of time? When will you delete them, or if ever? Where will they be archived? All those kinds of things. Are the data in a format that is generally acceptable, or is it proprietary, or those kinds of things? And then what kinds of resources do you think that you'll need from the institution? And really, a lot of times the answers that we get back are very sketchy. They're not as detailed as we need them to be, but it's an entree into that conversation. And I think it does work in kind of the flipped classroom way where you have someone sort of thinking about it, kind of engaging with the idea of research data management, and they sort of realize what they don't know, like, well, where could I put this and how much data will I generate and those sorts of things. And then that goes into the education part of it. So we don't really have a course that people take. I'm not sure that they would at our institution, but they do need to do this. And then we have a team of people that work with them to sort of build that from a worksheet into a research data management and sharing plan. Um, and we can identify resources that they need. And it's a team of about 3 people. So if you don't remember everything, you've got at least 2 other people that can go, oh, what about, and I think that helps convince people that there is support for them. It's not just a task, like we're trying to make something that's going to be useful to them. And it does educate them about their research and their data, as opposed to something that's more general about things that they may never need to know specifically. So that's how we do it. And I think to this, we've been doing it, I think, for about 5 years now, and I think it works pretty well. I think there are things that could be better, but we iterate on that process too.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really hard to teach with like a generic example because it's just not meaningful to people. We have to engage them with things that they actually care about, which is their data. Um, but that said, like I think when you're explaining the concepts in general before we get to the point where they're answering the questions, it's generally how I end up doing it because I'm doing it in a classroom setting. Um, Loading uh, the explanation with real life examples from other research groups and real life data workflows is really, really useful because if you can explain things in the abstract all day long, but until researchers hear an example of how something actually works, it's not as impactful.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I think due to the size of our university and how many researchers we are trying to assist, having those individual conversations is just, it's unfortunately not something we can do due to lack of resources. But that being said, even in our more generalized classes that we open up to all of the research community, most of which we're now doing virtually to reach a wider audience, we do try and find real life examples in those slides that we can include just to give researchers a better understanding of the concepts that we're teaching. So if we're talking about directory structures or file naming conventions, we try and give them exact examples that they could follow in their own research. And I find that those are the examples they then take and can easily incorporate into their labs. So these generalized concepts of you have to keep your data for X number of years in order to meet your data retention policy. Like that's just a really large concept that they're going to say, well, yeah, of course I'll do that. But how do I do that? Those are not as widely accepted into the lab as things like, well, if you include a date in your file name, then it's going to make searching easier. Or if you separate your raw data from your analyzed data, it's going to be better in the long run when we want to go share your data. So things like that are really easy for them to take and say, that's something I can actually do today, and then apply that to their own research, I think has been really useful for them rather than these just huge generalized concepts that they are saying, there's no way I'm going to be able to implement that into my lab.
Yeah, it's one of the advantages of being from a smaller institution where we kind of have the exact opposite, where we do know every researcher, and even to a large extent, all the students who are doing research and work. And, so that's nice. And that is, of course, very effective, being able to have those one-on-one conversations, being able to work with them, as I said, to craft those kind of bespoke solutions, options, really game out with them what they're trying to accomplish. That's one of the things I find is also quite effective. Is, not like a lot of times a researcher who either is out of their grad program or they're coming from another institution or whatever, they come in with a preconceived notion of how they want to do it at your institution. And they're like, well, can you set this up for me? Can we have a server to do this? I need this kind of storage. I need whatever. And if you just say yes, you're not, in my opinion, getting to the heart of, maybe there's a better way to do this. Maybe there's another option. And so by asking that question, what are you trying to accomplish? Just go back to first principles. Like, don't come in with a preconceived notion of how to solve the storage issue or the data management issue, more generally speaking. And you just have them talk about their research and what they want to do with it and who needs to see it and all that kind of stuff. Often you'll end up with a different solution than maybe what they had in mind. So that's a very useful thing is just, not to assume that they know the best way to deal with their data, but to have a conversation with them. And sure, if you arrive at that same solution that they would have come in the door with, awesome. But very often you're going to end up with something at least a little bit different.
Okay, additional thoughts? If not, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. I think you know, helping again, we talked sort of about the carrot and the stick and helping individuals really think about their data. I think one of the things that we did as a part of a training class, it's an hour and a half, and I think Pete said that there was a flipped classroom approach, and we did the same thing. We had people review materials, and then when they're in the classroom, hour and a half, one time, that's all you have to do. Not a huge investment. But there you get to actually talk about research data management as opposed to being lectured at. And we find that, and we also have a use case. So we walk through a scenario of, researcher getting data from X company, something very, very typical of what any of the researchers or the doctoral students would experience. And what's interesting is the fact that the sticking points are not what you think they are. In fact, we spend more of the time spending our time answering questions around data safety, data compliance, data usage agreements, these sorts of things, as opposed to sort of the actual tactical or logistical boots on the ground sort of things. And I think probably mostly because they're used to that or they figure they can handle it. Whereas some of these around the data safety and data usage are relatively new for them, especially with all the extra compliance. The other thing that I grabbed a couple of URLs here, and I'm going to put them in the chat. A little bit of self-promotion. It's some of our training materials, including our checklist. And as an hour and a half class, we really sort of kept it very, very simple on the practical things, as opposed to going into theoretical. What I think was really eye-opening or wonderful for me were not our stuff, actually. The Borgi paper was actually a really interesting paper. Like, okay, you've got to do research data management. Like, how much time do you have, or how much effort do you want to put into it? And I think this is a really interesting approach. Not that we want people to wait until the last minute, but it's a really a good tool for researchers to have. Like, if you're gonna do it, here's some of the minimum things that you should do, or here are some of the things that you could do that would have the greatest impact. And to me, that was like, it's gold. So that at least they're doing something. The other thing too is really as opposed to making people sit in training when they come on board. There's so much going on. I do like that Harvard Medical School has this. Julie Goldman is a tour de force. She's got this great video series for research data management. It is a little, biology centric, but it's just amazing, and it's asynchronous, just-in-time learning. So folks can, if they've got a question or something comes up, they can always go and access it there. But I think having these tools at hand and having making sure that they're available and linked on your websites and a part of especially sort of the onboarding process to using your resources. I think it's a really good way to ensure that as people start to do their work, that sort of, hey, remember about yada yada, and so that will really help in the long run as well.
All right, so following on that, let's migrate over to additional resources. I saw a number of resources there getting posted in the chat. Do folks have additional ones that they would like to share?
I will add, so in a follow-up to some of the training, I mentioned 3 papers, and I think some folks have already mentioned it as well, around using open source tools and the effort to do open science, open data, which I think are great resources as well for people to have.
And it's not necessarily a resource, but there is a conference that happens every year in March that I've found particularly useful. It's the RDAP conference, the Research Data Access and Preservation Conference. It's one of the smaller conferences, but it's all data professionals. It's all talking about tools and resources that's available. It's usually a 3-day conference, and I've found it to be one of the better data management focused conferences. If anyone, yeah, thanks Tobin in the chat. Yeah, it's, I think if you're really interested in research data management, this is a conference that you should attend.
I would second that as well. I have also attended that one in the past. Are there additional resources that folks would like to share? I see that someone here has a lessons link on GitHub. Of course, the carpentries was mentioned in the last session. I did see recently that they've put out a alpha version of data management planning as a part of their workshop series. So as folks are teaching about research data management, that could be something that you draw upon and help build out and make sure that it gets vetted appropriately.
I can also add here, it's a little out of date, but if you don't have something for your researchers, you might even just have something very, very simple like this. This is something we put together like about 5-6 years ago, where it's basically like a how-to for researchers. If you're in this phase, here's what you need to think about, and here are the resources at your school. I mean, it's a great opportunity for you as a facilitator or as a person in the libraries to get your colleagues together and say, hey, let's throw up a couple web pages on this, at least so there's something on record. Certainly good team building and morale building exercise, but this can go a long way.
Yeah, I can tell you that when I was in graduate school, if it wasn't on a website, I did not believe it existed. So it's really helpful to have web presence around this stuff. And just to say it out loud, I put a couple of links in chat. The first one is a link to a workbook that Kristen Briney wrote. She presented actually at RDAP about this project for, just worksheets to walk people through research data management planning, and also Marla Sedlins has been running a research data management workshop series at Colorado State for a while now. So that's been iterated on a lot. So the link to the LibGuide with slides is in the chat.
Yeah, and her book is really cheap too. It's like $30, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so like her original book is inexpensive, but like the second thing is just a book down thing that's
Mm,
free online. So
nice.
yeah.
Additional resources. I do see one question here. It might be best answered by Henry or someone more senior than we are here. Can we get all of this in the Google Doc, or should I save the chat and transcribe it?
So I'm honestly not sure how closed captioning works and whether that's getting um, saved. If the reference is only to what's in the chat, yes, if someone will poke me with an email asking me to put the chat for this session in the Google Doc for this session, I can do that.
That would be
Um,
great.
yeah, just somebody poke me with an email about it. And please be specific because I have no short-term memory. So the minute we stop talking about this, I'll forget it was ever brought up.
All right, will do.
I
All right.
posted one additional link that might be useful. It's to the Research Data Management Librarian Academy, which is an online course that you can take. It's free. It's related to professional development for IT librarians, any other research data professionals, but it's offered in partnership with a couple of different universities and the School of Library and Information Science at Simmons University in Boston. So it's a great resource if you're interested in taking those courses. I just wanted to put that link there as well.
Thanks.
All right. Let's go back here. All right, this is sort of a take on that last one. So in terms of, you know, maybe despite the resources that you all have provided to folks, if you could share with us some mistakes that you made in helping a researcher with their data management planning, and maybe some of the best or smartest things that you did when you're helping a researcher with that process.
I think one mistake that's really easy to make, especially as you're kind of starting out and you're trying to get familiar with how research data management works, is getting too involved in a project. Like I got, more than waist deep into a project where I was writing data cleaning code for a lab so that they could, clean it up to get it in a good format for the institutional repository. So that is not scalable. At the time, I was the only research data management specialist at the institution doing this stuff. So I could do it for one lab, but I couldn't do it for everybody. So pretty quickly after that, I learned that it's teach them how to fish is a way better approach because for you and for the research lab. Because if you um, leave or over capacity, they're going to be out of luck.
Okay, other mistakes and things that you've done that went really, really well.
Without getting too into it, I will say one mistake I made was definitely there was a data management plan that I was involved with, and I really had this feeling that I should be asking more questions, but there was a time crunch, and I think not every relationship you have with someone you're working with is going to be amazing. And so I felt like, okay, I think this covers all the bases. And then when the grant was funded, there were additional needs that were kind of in that squishy area where I didn't ask a lot of questions that really cost money that wasn't covered for in the grant. And I think if it's your responsibility to or part of your responsibility to try to head that off as part of your involvement with the research data management plan. I would just say that if you have that feeling that maybe you just don't have quite all the answers, you should keep poking, because the planning stage is the stage to do it. And if it is something that's going to cost money or time, some other resource, then you don't really have that agreement about how it's going to be done. That I think is really critical for this to work well. So that's one mistake I made without getting into too much detail.
Yeah, I think we've all made that mistake where we don't ask enough questions or we get overconfident in what we can supply in terms of resources and tools. And we kind of lead on the lab to think that we're able to offer them something that we end up not being able to offer due to lack of resources, or maybe we thought we had a subscription to a certain type of software and we find out we don't actually, and they would have to pay for it. So I think I always now try and take a step back and just ask the right questions and then do an internal review to make sure that what we are actually offering them is going to be a possibility. But that's just something, like Tobin was saying, that you kind of develop over time of understanding how much you know and how much you still don't know. And you might have to go back and actually do some research before you offer a solution.
Okay, additional thoughts on that one?
I was just going to add one more comment to second Sarah's. Because of the landscape is changing significantly, and with cloud, um, we do see a number of researchers trying to do data and data analysis work, locally, as if it's business as usual, and with the scale of data becoming I wouldn't say unmanageable, but such that you're not really going to want to transfer and work on it locally. It's very easy to sort of fall into that trap of doing what you're always regularly doing. And so, as Sarah and Topin were saying, sort of asking those questions and don't make any assumptions. Because it may have been this way yesterday, but tomorrow actually it could be quite different.
Think one mistake that many of us have made is taking at face value the statement that you have unlimited free storage in Google Drive forever. I'll just put that out there. And then somehow telling researchers that that is the case and that we should just roll with it. Yeah, that's just a little humor for this afternoon. But, I think one of the smartest things that I've been able to do, which I don't, I mean, I recognize fully that it's a privilege for me to be able to do this. And it's only because I'm at a much smaller institution. I don't think that this solution would scale, but I've been able to integrate very closely with our Office of Sponsored Programs and, you know, actually be able to review the grants as they come through and look at their data management plans, look at their budgets, ensure that, any technology that they're requesting or any, data management approaches that they're saying to take. Because I think one of the things that a lot of researchers may not appreciate, I mean, I think that they understand it intellectually, but in all of my conversations with Office of Sponsored Programs or whatever their equivalent is at the various institutions I've been affiliated with, it's not it's not a grant or a proposal from the researcher. It's on behalf of the institution. So what the researchers are requesting in terms of their needs, in terms of what they say they'll be able to do, um, that's putting the institution on the hook for that. And so it's very important, and I'm very lucky to be as closely embedded as I am with them to be able to weigh in on that and to give my opinions and to be able to then go back to the researchers and say, hey, you said this, can we talk about this a little bit and see what you mean by this? Or, maybe you don't necessarily need to ask for this solution because we already have this other one, which may actually meet your needs more effectively. Now, that does not scale at a place like Harvard or Northwestern or whatever. I totally get that. But at a smaller institution, I'm very lucky to be able to do that. And that's one of the, nicest things I think that we're able to do.
Jason, you bring up a really good point. I did have it on one of my bullet points on here, but I think that not only the relationship with your sponsored program office, or looking through the grants and grant proposals, but also working really closely with the library. And one of the things that we have seen, it was less of an issue in the biology realm because you download the NCBI databases and you format them and make them available for people, and so you're not having 3 or 4 copies of terabytes of information. In some of the other disciplines, it's less the case, and so we end up finding researchers, different groups downloading the same data set again and again and again, which creates a bit of a support burden for a number of individuals, not let alone frustration for the researcher. And so I think sort of stepping back and sort of keeping an eye on the situation, on what's going on in terms of data acquisition, data management, and working closely with library folks is an opportunity, I think, to optimize some of the ways that people get at data, the researchers get at data, and also that the data is in a computationally consumable fashion. It's
Yeah,
not
no,
just one thing to get the data, but yeah, to prep it as well.
I totally concur with that. And I think that this is obviously even a broader thing because another sort of office or arm to maybe try to align yourself with and get involved as you can in their processes is IRB.
Yeah.
I mean, IRB is often a first pass where they're proposing the kinds of data that they're going to collect and what they're going to do with them and who's going to ultimately have access to them. And, that is one of the first steps that researchers have to take. And so if we can even somehow get involved in that or, be somehow a voice or a reviewer or on the IRBs or whatever, that can be a tremendous help as well. Now, again, does that scale? I don't know. There's, a lot of those things going on, but certainly that is yet another place to kind of, I mean, I don't want to say head off any problems, but just to be able to, support researchers and help them craft from the ground up, kind of what they're proposing to do and how they're proposing to do it, I think is very effective and helpful.
Getting there early, getting in there early.
Just to go off of that, I'm not sure about the extent to which you all are seeing this in the last few years, probably within the last since 2021, so 3 years. My colleagues and I in the library, and to some extent our IT department, have been collaborating to develop and work with our Office of the Vice Provost for Research, and encourage them to implement things like workflows and procedures that help to get folks in the IRB office a bit closer to this work. And we've also been collaborating more closely with our grants pre and post award funding administrators and folks in related offices to sort of shorten the workflows and some of those complexities that you're talking about, especially with respect to data management plans for third-party data providers. So that data use agreement, data management planning combination. I don't know if that's something that you all are also experiencing as well. Yes, I see Bob nodding. Thanks.
My colleague I'm spacing on her name right now. She'd kill me. She and I had this great plan and vision of a system, that would handle, from project all the way to data destruction and deposition, so that, it was, the ideal situation. Of course, probably would cost, lots of money, but just being able to handle, reminders on expirations of data usage agreements, and just a number of different things to make the whole process much easier and less burdensome for the researcher. Was really what we like everybody here has been thinking and talking about. No, sorry, it wasn't Merce. It was Katie.
Micah. Katie
No.
Micah.
So at HBS, she's since left.
Okay.
Yeah. She and I just spent a lot of time thinking about this and how could we make this easier, especially since it was all the RAs that were going back, and having to stumble over this process. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And I think we're coming up on time. I want to make sure that folks in the audience here if you all have any additional questions. I see someone in the chat has posted, let's see, this is Maureen in St. Louis. Budget constraints are a big issue for us. I don't think that you're alone with that, Maureen. And certainly thinking about things like workflows, processes, I think increasing transparency for researchers in terms of who it is that they talk with about data management planning, where it is that they go get that support, I think could be really beneficial in terms of helping to minimize budgetary resources, right, with respect to the researcher's time and effort, especially if they're paying for things with external grants. Additional questions or remarks from our audience or from our colleagues here who may have some additional thoughts on the questions that we just presented on. All right. Well, I would thank you all today for, oh, there's my chime. I would thank you all today for participating and for joining us. And of course, as we continue on through the week, I'd encourage folks, of course, to have a look at the notes, connect with panelists if you all have any additional questions. In our notes document, we should have some most up-to-date bios. And if our panelists have any additional contact information, I'd encourage you all to provide that information. But certainly we can save our resources and get those in there so you all have access to them. And of course, you'll have access to the recording as well. So I'll pass it back over to Henry if he has any additional comments here.
Yes, and first, thank you so much to you all. This was a terrific panel and very informative. We really appreciate it. So let's have a round of virtual applause for our panel. And I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can have some quick wrap-up announcements for tomorrow's program.